Okay, chat, the Man of Steel, not Henry Cavill. I'm talking about Corn Sweet. I believe that's his name. A friend of mine and fellow YouTuber also gave it very high marks. I think I'd give it about an 8 out of 10. The movie was fun, but the most important thing that I think was conveyed in the Superman movie wasn't the comic accurate suits. It wasn't the extremely awesome fight scenes, although there were a few. Some of them were kind of corny, like when it was the big, I don't know what this would be called. I'm gonna try to put a photo here. I don't know what this dude is called, but there was like a big ass green monster. And that fight scene, I just personally didn't like. It introduced a lot of the characters that we're gonna see throughout this movie, like the Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, Mr. Terrific. Also, you could argue that Superman demonstrates some feats of strength that he really does struggle with, and I just don't know enough about Superman to have any gripes with it and whether or not he should feel this weak from time to time. Because genuinely, anytime that I think of Superman, I think of an immovable object that just has an unlimited amount of strength. That could be my misconception, but throughout the movie, you do see him struggle with things that are heavy, to be fair. But to Superman would feel like you should be tossing this shit up and like juggling planets at this point. But that could just be, like I said, my misconception. I alluded earlier to something that they did phenomenally well in this movie, and it is making Superman feel human. I think something that was missing in both like this, you could say like the Snyder cut, but overall just every Superman iteration that has come out thus far, at least from what I've seen. I haven't gone that far back, but I've definitely seen him enough. Henry Cavill's run was cool, but it never felt like this superhero was human. There was no connection there. He didn't feel like he could have any flaws in the same way humans do. There were glimpses of it, maybe like through his connection with Lois or his connection with his parents and things like that. And when you wanted to appeal to a more kid-like Superman struggling with the upbringing of his abilities and having to adjust to being on a different planet, although he kind of lived here since birth almost. I think James Gunn and this movie in general just did an insanely phenomenally good job at making Superman feel, and just making him feel not vulnerable, but just like a real person, real people dialogue, real people issues. And even when he was facing up against Lex Luthor and things like that, you felt like there was some sort of humanity to him that I think was missing in a lot of other movies that he's been in. That being said, there were some very corny moments, in my opinion, where because he felt so human, the monologue portion where you would typically have, you know, I am the voice of justice. But one in particular that I remember is when he was talking to Lex Luthor kind of towards the end. I won't spoil too much. He was talking to him and he was kind of just monologuing a little bit more. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but I do remember feeling just a little cringy, a little like, ooh. Not a real person would say this. You could, I think, sometimes drop some absolute heater bars and just drop them and like everybody in the theater could have their jaw on the floor, and I think that's perfectly fine. But a monologue sometimes can just fringe on that just cringiness of, oh, you're too human feeling to have this level of monologue and like grandstanding, it almost feels like. I wasn't the biggest fan of Guy Gardner either. I do know that he is in the comics, and as far as it's conveyed in this movie, it wasn't my favorite version. Mr. Terrific actually kind of grew on me, and his one fight scene that like he was able to just go all out really did surprise me, but also in a movie that does such a good job humanizing and brings some sort of realism to Superman, I just genuinely don't like when there's shooting everywhere and you know, there's 100 people against one person and people are shooting everywhere in every which direction, that the main character or like the superhero, Mr. Terrific in this specific analogy, can go out and, you know, do their thing and not get a scratch on them. I get that it's supposed to be like plot armor and you're also supposed to like convey how good this superhero is and how cool he is. But at the same time, like I said, a movie that does convey a certain amount of realism that I think Superman did need. I didn't think that you needed this whole like makeshift city against Mr. Terrific and he's kind of breezing through it like, ooh, 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 like aura million, dodging bullets And like also we didn't need all that. He could have conveyed it in a cooler, more subtle way, in my opinion. I talked about this on an episode of my podcast, Usual Tuesdays, comes out usually on Tuesdays. How, in my opinion, we don't necessarily need origin stories anymore. So I do appreciate that we pick up and get little bits of pieces of Superman's origin story as we go on, because as a fan base and as like people get into these movies, you do have YouTube channels dedicated to these storylines and dedicated to discovering and explaining where these characters originate from through the comics and their original, source material. I also am a big fan of just trusting the audience more. I think James Gunn does a good job. I think he rides the line sometimes of over-explaining, but overall does a good job of trusting the audience, trusting that we're smart enough to understand and piece things together as we go along, or on the flip side, giving enough context to be able to afterwards be able to go back and watch either the movie again or pick up source material, whether that be the comics, or big shout out to Comic Explains, where we can learn more about this character in particular. Long speech, long yapper. Alrighty, I appreciate you for watching. I'm curious to know what your opinion is. The long and short of it is I think this is the best Superman movie that has been made so far. I'm hoping that it only gets better. Marvel definitely needs the competition when it comes to these comic movies. And DC, now in the hands of James Gunn, seems like it's going to start picking up steam as long as they go in this direction of, in my opinion, humanizing their superheroes, as well as giving them really good storylines to kind of draw it all out. Thank you so much for watching. Again, all thoughts, all comments, all concerns down below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.